Hi, welcome back. We have started reading The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And the last part that we just read was the beginning of the book. And you'll remember that Eustace, who is a cousin of the children that we've seen before, and Edmund and Lucy were pulled into a picture on the wall. And it was a picture of a boat in a sea. And they ended up in the sea, and then they were rescued from the sea and brought on board a ship. And it turns out when they got on board the ship, there was Caspian. And Caspian is the fellow that we read about in our last book, Prince Caspian. He's now king of Narnia, but he's on board this ship. And we're going to find out more about why he's on board the ship and what's going on here. And of course, Eustace is, we found out he's kind of a spoiled child and a little bit grumpy about things and complains a lot. But Caspian had asked Rheinelf, one of the sailors on board the ship, to go and get some spiced wine for Edmund and Lucy. They're so happy to see each other again, and that'll help warm them up. Here's a picture in my book. If you can see that, you see right down there? There's Rheinelf carrying a tray of warm spiced wine, and there you can see Eustace on the other side of the picture, and he's kind of grumpy and water dripping off of him. And there's Caspian with his hands on Edmund's shoulders, and there's Lucy watching them. Okay, so there's the reunion on board the ship. Rheinelf returned with the spiced wine steaming in a flagon and 4 silver cups. It was just what one wanted, and as Lucy and Edmund sipped it, they could feel the warmth going right down to their toes. But Eustace made faces and spluttered and spat it out and was sick again and began to cry again and asked if they hadn't any plum trees vitamized nerve food and could it be made with distilled water. And anyway, he insisted on being put ashore at the next station. "This is a merry shipmate you've brought us, brother," whispered Caspian to Edmund with a chuckle. But before he could say anything more, Eustace burst out again. "Oh, ugh, what on earth's that? Take it away, the horrid thing." He really had some excuse this time for feeling a little surprised. Something very curious indeed had come out of the cabin in the poop and was slowly approaching them. Now, the poop is the back of the ship, a cabin at the back of the ship. So something came out of that cabin. You might call it, and indeed it was, a mouse. But then it was a mouse on its hind legs, and it stood about 2 feet high. A thin band of gold passed round its head under one ear and over the other, and in this was stuck a long crimson feather. As the mouse's fur was very dark, almost black, the effect was bold and striking. In its left paw rested on the hilt of a sword, very nearly as long as its tail. Its balance, as it paced gravely along the swaying deck, was perfect, and its manners courtly. So this is what it looks like. There's a picture in my book. You see there? There's that mouse walking on its back legs, and there's its tail, and it's got a sword in a belt, and there's that band around his head with a feather. So he's a very handsome-looking mouse. He's very dark and about 2 feet high, and he's very courtly. Reepicheep put forward, well, wait a second. I need to go back a little bit. Lucy and Edmund recognized it at once. Reepicheep, the mouse valiant of all the talking beasts of Narnia and the chief mouse. It had won undying glory in the second battle of Baruna. Lucy longed, as she had always done, to take Reepicheep up in her arms and cuddle him. But this, as she well knew, was a pleasure she could never have, It would have offended him deeply. Instead, she went down on one knee to talk to him. Reepicheep put forward his left leg, drew back his right, and bowed and kissed her hand, and straightened himself, twirled his whiskers, and said in his shrill, piping voice, my humble duty to your majesty, and to King Edmund too. Here he bowed again. Nothing except your majesty's presence, nothing except your majesty's presence was lacking to this glorious venture. Ugh, take it away, wailed Eustace. I hate mice, and I never could bear performing animals. They're silly and vulgar and sentimental. Am I to understand? I can't carry on with that high voice of Reepicheep, so I'm going to use a regular voice when he talks. Okay? Am I to understand, said Reepicheep to Lucy, after a long stare at Eustace, that this singularly discourteous person is under your majesty's protection? Because if not, at this moment, Lucy and Edmund both sneezed. Oh, what a fool I've been to keep you all standing here in your wet things, said Caspian. Come on below and get changed. I'll give you my cabin, of course, Lucy, but I'm afraid we have no women's clothes on board. You'll have to make do with some of mine. Lead the way, Reepicheep, like a good fellow. So Reepicheep was offended by Eustace calling him a performing animal, and he was about ready to challenge him to a duel or something, but Caspian intervened and said, "Oh, we need to get you out of these wet clothes and stuff." And so this challenge was averted. To the convenience of a lady, said Reepicheep, even a question of honor must give way, at least for the moment. So he's going to put off his challenge. And here he looked very hard at Eustace. But Caspian hustled them on, and in a few minutes Lucy found herself passing through the door into the stern cabin. Stern is another word for the back of a ship, what we call the poop or the cabin at the back. So the stern or the poop or the back of the ship. She fell in love with it at once, that is, with the cabin. The three square windows that looked out on the blue swirling water astern, that is, back behind the boat, the low cushioned benches round three sides of the table, the swinging silver lamp overhead, dwarf's work she knew at once by its exquisite delicacy, and the flat gold image of Aslan, the lion, on the forward wall above the door. All this she took in a flash, for Caspian immediately opened a door on the starboard side and said, now, starboard side, what's that again? That's the right side of the ship as you're looking forward. So he opens the door on the right side or the starboard side and said, this will be your room, Lucy. I'll just get some dry things for myself. He was rummaging in one of the lockers while he spoke, and then he continues, leave you to change. If you'll fling your wet things outside the door, I'll get them taken to the galley to be dried. Lucy found herself as much at home as she had been in Caspian's cabin for weeks, as if she had been in Caspian's cabin for weeks, and the motion of the ship did not worry her, for in the old days, when she had been a queen in Narnia, she had done a good deal of voyaging. The cabin was very tiny but bright, with painted panels, all birds and beasts and crimson dragons and vines, and spotlessly clean. Caspian's clothes were too big for her, but she could manage. His shoes, sandals, and sea boots were hopelessly large, but she did not mind going barefoot on board the ship. I hope she doesn't get splinters in her feet. When she had finished dressing, she looked out of her window at the water rushing past and took a deep breath. She felt quite sure they were in for a lovely time. But here's a picture of Lucy in the cabin. She's getting ready to change her clothes, and you can see the bunk and the window and stuff. And it's a small little room, which really belongs to Caspian, but he's turning it over to her, so it'll be her room. And then chapter 2 begins. I'm going to read into it for a little while. "Ah, there you are, Lucy," said Caspian. "We were just waiting for you. This is my captain, the Lord Drinian." Oh, so Caspian himself is not the captain of the ship. He's the king, and he's on the ship, but there's a captain of the ship, the person who's in charge of the ship, and his name is Drinian. A dark-haired man went down on one knee and kissed her hand. The only others present were Reepicheep and Edmund. "Where is Eustace?" asked Lucy. "In bed," said Edmund, "and I don't think we can do anything for him. It only makes him worse if you try to be nice to him." "Meanwhile," said Caspian, "we want to talk." "By Jove, we do," said Edmund. "And first, about time. It's a year ago, by our time, since we left you, just before your coronation. How long has it been in Narnia?" Remember that time is different in our world than it is in Narnia. "Exactly 3 years," said Caspian. "All going well?" asked Edmund. "You don't suppose I'd have left my kingdom and put to sea unless all was well," answered the king. "It couldn't be better. There's no trouble at all now between the Telmarines, dwarfs, and talking beasts, and fauns, and the rest, and we gave those troublesome giants on the frontier such a good beating last summer that they pay us tribute now. And I had an excellent person to leave as regent while I'm away." Now, regent is a person who stands in for the king when the king is out of the country. So he says, "I have an excellent person to stand in as regent while I'm away. Trumpkin, the dwarf." Oh, we remember Trumpkin from the last book. A valiant dwarf. He was a red dwarf, had red hair. He was quite a warrior in the battles. "You remember him?" "Oh, dear Trumpkin," said Lucy. "Of course I do. You couldn't have made a better choice." "Loyal as a badger, ma'am, and valiant as a mouse," said Drinian. He had been going to say "as a lion," but had noticed Reepicheep's eyes fixed on him. "And where are we heading for?" asked Edmund. "Well," said Caspian, "that's rather a long story. Perhaps you remember that when I was a child, my usurping Uncle Miraz got rid of 7 friends of my father's who might have taken my part by sending them off to explore the unknown eastern seas beyond the lone islands." "Yes," said Lucy, "and none of them ever came back." "Right. Well, on my coronation day, with Aslan's approval, I swore an oath that if once I established peace in Narnia, I would sail east myself for a year and a day and find my father's friends, or to learn of their deaths and avenge them if I could. These were their names: the Lord Revilian, the Lord Byrne, the Lord Argos, the Lord Mavramorn, the Lord Octesian, the Lord Restamar, and the other one who's so hard to remember." "The Lord Roop, sire," said Drinian. Roop, of course," said Caspian. "That is my main intention." Now, so they're off on a voyage because King Caspian is looking for the 7 lords that his uncle had sent away when he was a child. And he wants to know what happened to them because they were loyal to Caspian, even though he was just a child at the time. So they're off on a journey to see if they can find where the 7 lords are. But Reepicheep here has an even higher hope. So beyond finding the 7 lords, Reepicheep has a goal of his own. Everyone's eyes turn to the mouse. "As high as my spirit," it said, "though perhaps as small as my stature. Why should we not come to the very eastern end of the world? And what might we find there? I expect to find Aslan's own country. It is always from the east, across the sea, that the great lion comes to us." "I say, that is an idea," said Edmund in an odd voice. So Reepicheep wants to go to the end of the world, all the way to the east, and find Aslan's country. But do you think, said Lucy, Aslan's country would be that sort of a country? I mean, the sort you could ever sail to? I do not know, madam, said Reepicheep, but there is this. When I was in my cradle, a wood woman, a dryad, spoke this verse over me. Where sky and water meet, where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, to find all you seek. There is the utter east. So this is one of those prophecies, and Dryad had spoken this over Reepicheep's cradle when he was just a little mouse. I do not know what it means, but the spell of it has been on me all my life. Okay, well, we're going to stop there. And so Eustace is off somewhere because he's seasick, lying in bed. And Lucy has now been given Caspian's cabin to stay in and some clothes to wear, even though they're Caspian's clothes. And we have found out what's going on, that they're on a trip to try to find the seven lords, and Reepicheep's hoping to find the utter east in Aslan's country. And we've learned the names of the seven lords, but I won't try to repeat them because I can't remember them from time to time. But we have also met the captain of the ship, whose name is Drinian. Okay? Well, next time we'll find out more about the trip and where they are at the present time and what their next destination is, because there are several destinations as they go east. So that's it for today. Have a good time. Bye now.